Hello, everyone, and welcome back to week 4 of our study on the book of Ruth. I'm excited to share with you what we're going to be doing as we dive into Ruth chapter 3 today. Today, the theme is about covering and uncovering and kind of the tension between those two. There's a bit of uncovering that happens, physically as we get into this book and hear about exactly what Ruth does to get the intention of Boaz, but also there's a bit of uncovering as we figure out what's going on underneath everything, and a bit of covering as we begin to see what people hide to anticipate what they can do with the future. So, first off, I want to start with some questions for you. Have you ever failed at something? I mean, especially something you've always wanted. And how did God move you to faithfulness despite your failures? You know, church history is loaded with saints who have moved from failure to faithfulness, whether it's in reading through the backstories of everyone named in Hebrews 11, or even Paul marvels that he, as one who persecuted the church, could be used to spread the good news, as he talks about it repeatedly in the introductions in his letters. St. Augustine, one of the heralded fathers of our faith, was deeply involved in self-indulgence and degradation before he entered ministry. And one story in particular stood out to me in anticipation of today, and that was of a man called Charles Colson. Now, those of you who are old enough to recall, was Nixon's hatchet man, and he's the one who, after serving alongside Nixon, got caught up in some of the scandal and aftermath of Watergate, and served 7 months in Maxwell Prison for obstruction of justice. Now, why am I bringing this guy up? Because after he became a Christian in 1973, he saw all the things that had been failure for him become faithfulness. He started a prison fellowship ministry for Christian worldview, and he became a Templeton Award winner because of all he had done, or all he continued to do through the remainder of his life, to bring people to the knowledge and love of Jesus Christ. I think of, in addition to what Charles Colson has done, I have a couple friends myself who have been in similar situations, have found themselves with everything stripped out from underneath them, whether that be their credentials or their life or their prison record marking them for life. And yet they find themselves in situations where they can bring wholeness and healing into the world because they know what it's like to be broken and have nothing. So today, as we work through Ruth chapter 3, God is revealing to us exactly how the brokenness of Ruth and Naomi and their lineage, which is also broken a lot, can be redeemed and used for God's glory. You know, Ruth and Naomi failed at the original plan. The original plan was get married, have babies, have grandchildren, continue the family line. Oh, look, there's no food. Well, we'll just continue the family line in Moab. And when the original plan was stripped out from underneath them, when death disrupted the lineage, God's call and their faithful response allowed and made room for redemption. So this section of Ruth chapter 3, just fair warning, it's full of double entendres. And unfortunately, it's kind of hard to sort out what all the connotations are when we're hearing a story that was originally oral tradition in what is now a dead language. For instance, the Hebrew words for to know and to lie down sound innocent on the outset, but both words, while they can simply mean what they say, they also can be an indication for sexual intercourse. So we don't really know exactly what extent this story, the interactions are taking place, but what we do know is that Ruth and Boaz get the quick way of recognizing and claiming one another. So in Ruth chapter 3, we see how Ruth and Naomi have continued to live through gleaning, paycheck to paycheck, and they need a stable opportunity. So they come up with a way to present this opportunity to their kinsman. If you remember from last week, their kinsman redeemer, who is Boaz. Boaz, they want to find rest in him. And more appropriately, these words are translated to mean they want to find security in him. Naomi intends the plan that she lays out for Ruth to bring them security. So Ruth has washed and adorned herself, and the language around her washing can either be mourning or preparation for a wedding. We're not really, it probably is kind of both, as she grieves the old life she has and had and prepares for the new life she will have. So much of this section is so ambiguous and filled with the euphemisms. I mean, is this innocent laying down on the floor or lying down together? Is this uncovering of the feet literally, or is it a slang used for uncovering of lower parts? You know, nakedness in Scripture represents vulnerability. So whatever physical places Ruth was uncovering, Boaz was in a vulnerable position as she uncovered him, potentially even a shameful one. Now, knowing this kind of insinuation, Naomi's plan for Ruth to go in and hide herself and lay down and wait for Boaz and then eventually uncover him, Naomi's plan sounds a bit manipulative, even unworthy. But, you know, Naomi's plan also has a precedent in the Scriptures. If you think of the generations of women in Israel who have worked to find their way into lives of men when they've been without, I'm not excusing what they've done, but Naomi definitely knew the stories of these women throughout her heritage that had taken charge in a society where they usually had no voice. So, I like to think of it in terms of the movie, if you've ever seen My Big Fat Greek Wedding, where they say the man is the head of the household. The man is the head, but the woman is the neck, and she can move the head any way she wants. It's a bit of manipulation, and we laugh at it, but when is it using your wits, and when is it considered a dysfunctional relationship? It's kind of a bit of a gray area. So, Naomi continues into this section by setting up this plan that will do these kinds of things. Just for example, some of the situations that Naomi is basing her decisions off of. Genesis chapter 19 tells the story of Lot and his daughters who take matters into their own hands after they've seen their world, which was Sodom and Gomorrah, destroyed. They think that the whole world has ended. They don't know what's going to happen next. They don't know how to continue their family line. So what do? They get their father drunk, they commit incest, and they become pregnant. And you know what? Their children are the fathers of the Moabites and the Ammonites, which is the line that Ruth has come from. What a broken lineage we're dealing with in this story, right? And yet that's how part of the world was continued. So Ruth comes from the line that was an end of the world panic and an incestuous relationship. Genesis chapter 38, who's this about? If you recall the story of Judah and Tamar, I mentioned it briefly last week, but Tamar is frustrated with circumstances. As first her husband dies, and then according to law, if her husband dies without her having children, she's allowed to marry another brother. So she marries the second brother, and guess what? He dies, and they still haven't had children. So the youngest brother is way younger than her, and Judah, the father, says, well, stick around with us, and when he's old enough, we can marry him off to you. But Judah, either through laziness or through feeling that Tamar is cursed, refuses to allow the third son to marry her when he's of age. And Tamar starts getting desperate because she's basically going to be abandoned. So Tamar proceeds to seduce her father-in-law while she's dressed up as a prostitute on the side of the road. And as she seduces him, she takes from him his pendant necklace, which has kind of like a family crest on it, and his cloak. And so whenever she finds out that she's pregnant, which is what she's been hoping for all along to continue the family line, she goes to him, and he threatens to throw her out. He thinks she's been, unwed marriage kind of situation, and he's like, I'm your protector, I'm in charge of you, you're a part of this family, and suddenly you're doing this to us, how shameful of you, I'm going to cast you out. And then she produces proof of who the man is, showing Judah that it was him all along. Her son, Perez, her son through hers and Judah's relationship, is Boaz's ancestor. Now just piece that all together for a moment, okay? We're talking about all these manipulative situations that have happened out of what felt like desperation, of what felt like a situation that had no potential for redemption. And yet, out of the drunken, incestuous relationship comes Ruth's ancestors. Out of the not so drunken, but still kind of sketchy relationship comes Boaz's ancestors. Here is an opportunity presenting itself as we see these two family lines come back together and find hope and redemption. When have you ever jumped at an opportunity presenting itself? Every time the chance comes up for us to move, I'm a Methodist minister, we're itinerant in our ministry, which means when the bishop says move, you move, more or less. And in the nature of my ministry and in my life, my children have already lived in 5 different homes, and the oldest one is 7 right now. So we tend to move a lot. We tend to get bounced around a lot. And when do I say yes to these opportunities, and when are they a bad decision to say yes to? I don't know. But when have you jumped at an opportunity presenting itself to you? Maybe it's for a move, maybe it's for a different thing in your life, maybe it's just for something to get out of the situation you're in. And how does your jumping mean that God is being faithful, that you're following the ways of holiness? All right, let's get back to the story for a minute. Boaz finds Ruth, and as she requests he share his blanket with her as the kinsman redeemer, Boaz agrees to make this happen. Now, interestingly enough, Naomi, in her instructions earlier in the chapter, has told Ruth to wait for Boaz's instructions. But as you read the text later in chapter 3, Ruth kind of jumps right in and doesn't wait for Boaz to say anything. She lays out the procedure for him. She says, okay, here's what we're going to do. Yeah, I need you to do this and this and this, and gives Boaz the actions to do. And she kind of challenges him to take an action on her behalf, which is basically her saying, I'm willing, marry me. Take care of this. Now, as we've just named in the previous weeks, the Levites, the leaders in this heritage, operated from a code that wasn't just the laws as we read them in Scripture. So there's a bit of procedure in here that we're not familiar with, but seems to be the kind of their standard ways of operating, of running their communities. Well, Ruth could have married anyone, young or rich, and guaranteed heirs, having a better life. But as Boaz points out, only he or the other person that they seem to have conveniently forgotten about can redeem this family and restore their name and property. So Ruth challenges Boaz to be the occasion of divine blessing in her life. And he accepts. He extends the grace. Now, is it Boaz's inclination or traditional piety or entrapment or his struggle with her economic need or a loving relationship or feeling shamed into duty? We don't know. The passage doesn't explain the intentions, but what it does demonstrate is that no matter what our broken human ways of trying to work things out or intentions may be, that God can offer redemption. So, what are we learning so far? First off, Hebrew is ambiguous. Everybody give that one an amen. We don't always know the specific things it's getting at, but we can guess at and discern what the general idea is. Number 2, it's not enough to pray for an open door. We actually have to walk through it. This passage reminds us that we have to be spurred on to action even when we're struggling to discern what to do next. And finally, my favorite one is that God is in the practice of redeeming desperate situations. No matter how broken the conflict or the situation is that we find ourselves in the midst of, God is in the practice of redeeming it. What a holy and precious grace to take into our lives. When have you experienced this type of unmerited favor? God's grace.